Hey kids, we're back with some more chapters on Little Pilgrims Progress, and hopefully you are continuing to enjoy this. I know I've enjoyed the story and trying to see all of how it relates to our spiritual walk and all the things that we go through as Christians. So we're going to be in chapter 25. Chapter 25. Little Pilgrims meet Evangelist. Soon after they had parted from Talkative, the two little pilgrims came to a wide, desolate plain. No tree grew upon it, and there was no flowers among it. The short, dry grass, the way of the king, went straight across it, and Christian looked forward. He was glad that he was not alone, for the path looked long and dreary. But with Faithful for a companion, the time passed quickly, and toward the close of the afternoon the tired children were glad to find they were not very far from the border of the plain. Beyond it the country appeared green and beautiful, and Christian hoped they might soon come to another one of the king's houses, where they would be allowed to rest until morning. Presently Faithful thought he heard footsteps behind him, and looking back he saw someone whose face seemed like that of an old friend. He stood still and cried out, "Oh, Christian, Christian, do you see who's coming after us?" Christian turned also and clasped his hands for joy. "It is Evangelist!" he exclaimed. How pleased the boys were to see their good friend once more. Evangelist had much to hear, and he smiled with eagerness while the pilgrims told him of all that they had seen and done. "The king has been very good to you," he said at length. "You have met with some enemies and some troubles, but he has helped you always, and he will help you still if you trust him." "I'm sure he will," said Christian. Faithful only clasped his fingers a little more tightly round those of Evangelist, for he felt shy and half afraid to speak. But Evangelist knew that he loved and trusted the king with all his heart, and that he would be quite as brave as Christian if the servants of the wicked prince were to attack him. "Will you tell us more about the road?" asked Christian. "Will it be easier now, or are there some other dreadful places to pass through?" Evangelist looked grave. "I came to meet you here," he answered, "because very soon you will reach the gates of the great city that belonged to the wicked prince. It is a beautiful city, full of all kinds of pleasant things, and many pilgrims, when they enter it, are tempted to stay there instead of going on their journey. I do not wish you to be foolish, so I've come to warn you about it." "Why must we pass through?" said Faithful. "The wicked prince ordered it to be built on both sides of the king's way, so the pilgrims could not possibly get to the celestial city without passing through the middle of it." "What shall we do then?" "We must walk quietly along the street. Do not stop to look at the beautiful things in the shops, in the market, and do not let the children persuade you to play with them. Sometimes the pilgrims are not much troubled by the townspeople. Sometimes they are treated very cruelly." "Will they kill us, do you think?" asked Christian. "They may perhaps put you in prison," replied Evangelist, "and they often have been wicked enough to kill people who would not serve their prince. But do not be afraid. If you have to die there, the king will send his angels, and they will carry you at once to the celestial city, and you will have no more trouble or pain forever." The sun was setting when Evangelist told the children goodbye, and before its light had faded away, they saw in the distance the walls of the great and the gate of the great strong city. "Are you afraid?" said little Christian. "Not very much," answered Faithful. "The king will take care of us. And you have your good armor. Yes, I do wish that you had stayed at the beautiful palace, and then you would have some armor too." "Never mind," said Faithful. "I shall keep close to you, and if the people do kill me, there will be no more enemies to fight." He put his hand on Christian's, and Christian thought of the king and tried not to feel frightened. But he was only a little boy, and as he passed through the wide archway and heard the heavy gate close behind him, he whispered to Faithful, "I should like Evangelist to be taking hold of my hand now." And Faithful said, "Yes, perhaps if we had asked him, he would have gone through the city with us. What a pity we did not think of it." Chapter 26, Vanity Fair. You know that the wicked prince hated the good king who ruled over the celestial city, and it made him very angry to see the pilgrims on their way from this country to that of the king. He had built this city, which is called Vanity Fair, just beyond the dark valley, in the wilderness, because he knew that when the pilgrims reached its gates, they would be feeling tired and faint. And he hoped that that it would be easy to persuade them to stay there instead of going further in the way of the king. So he filled the great city with everything that was pleasant and beautiful. It had broad streets and handsome houses, and stalls in its markets were covered with glittering wares. All along, the people were passing busily up and down. They wore fine clothes and spent their whole time in pleasing themselves. And the wicked prince took care to give them plenty of things to enjoy, so they might never have a moment to spare in which to think of the king, whom they had forsaken. After they had lived in Vanity Fair for a short time, most of the pilgrims forgot the king altogether. And when they saw other pilgrims passing on their way to the celestial city, they were ready to help the servants of the wicked prince in persuading the travelers to give up their journey. It was dark when our two little pilgrims entered the town, so they stayed quiet in a sheltered corner near the gate until the next morning. As soon as the sun rose, they began their walk through the city, for they thought if they had started early, they might perhaps reach the opposite gate before the streets became crowded with people. But little Christian's bright armor and the white suit that Faithful wore were not like the dress of the children in Vanity Fair. The boys had only gone a very short distance before they were noticed by some lads who were strolling idly by. "There are two pilgrims," they cried. "Let us go after them and stop them." Christian and Faithful could hear the boys running behind them, but they did not look around. "Don't let us take any notice," said Christian. "Perhaps they will just speak to us." When the boys came up, they all gathered closely around the pilgrim and would not let them pass. "Tell us where you have come from," said one. And who gave you that armor and those white clothes?" cried another. "Why don't you look at the shops?" asked a third. "Boys like you don't want sword or shield. You should sell them and buy these beautiful things." Christian scarcely knew what to say, for the boys were all speaking at once, and he felt quite confused. But little Faithful answered bravely, "We don't wish for any of your things. We are going to the celestial city." Then the boys laughed rudely, and one of them pushed Faithful so that he would have fallen if it had not been holding Christian's hand. By this time, many other children had run toward them, and some other people stopped also to see what was the matter. Then one of the wicked prince's servants passed by, and when he saw Christian's shining helmet, he thought that the boy must be pilgrims. So he pushed his way through the crowd and seized them by both shoulders. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Our prince does not allow children to quarrel in the streets." "We are not quarreling," said Christian. "We are walking along quietly." "This is nonsense," replied the man. "You have caused all this crowd and disturbance. You must come with me." "We are the king's pilgrims," said Faithful. "We are not disturbing anyone. We only wish to pass through the city." "I don't know anything about the king's pilgrims," answered the man. "I can see that you are two foolish, troublesome boys, and you must be taken before the governor." So he led them down the streets to the governor's house, and the children of the town followed, laughing and mocking all the poor little pilgrims whom had brought into such trouble. Chapter 27. Little Pilgrims Suffer for the King's Sake. The governor of the city was one of the wicked prince's chief servants, and he hated the king and his pilgrims almost as much as his master did. When Faithful and little Christian were brought before him, he was quite glad to think that he had an excuse for hurting someone whom the king loved. And he said, "You are two very bad boys, and you must both be beaten, and afterwards you shall be shut up in an iron cage, so that the children of the town may see you and know what will be done to them if they follow your example." It was no use for the little pilgrim to say anything. The tears came into Christian's eyes when he heard the governor's cruel words, and he wondered whether his mother would know what happened to him. Faithful's cheeks grew white, but he whispered to Christian, "Evangelist said that they might hurt us, but if we die, we shall go straight to the celestial city. I shall think of the king, because he is sure to help me, and I will not cry." Then Christian determined to be brave too, and he remembered the picture he had seen in the house of the interpreter of the Good Shepherd, whose feet were torn and bleeding. He is our prince, thought Christian, and he did not mind the pain. I must not either, because I am the king's servant. And as it is written in my book, that the king's servants are to be like the prince. And although the strokes of the heavy rod made his back and his arms feel terribly sore and bruised, he behaved like a brave soldier and did not cry at all. The iron cage was placed in the middle of the market with bars of iron in front of it, so that it looked like a den for a wild beast. After they had been beaten, the little pilgrims had chains fastened on their hands and feet, and then the man who had charge of them put them into their cage and left them there. They could not stand upright, for they were ill and weak with pain, so they sat down together on the ground and tried to comfort each other by reminding him of the king's promises. We knew that they would be cruel, said Faithful, but it is for the king's sake, and he will not let them hurt us too much. When the people of the town heard that two of the king's pilgrims were lying in the cage, they were very eager to see them. And soon a crowd of rude boys and girls and men and women also gathered around to stare at Faithful and Christian, to mock them in their trouble. The boys of Vanity Fair said all kinds of cruel things to provoke the pilgrim and make them displease the king by being passionate and angry with their enemies. But Christian and Faithful sat still, and neither of them gave a cross answer to anything that was said. At last, some of the boys, when they saw how patient the little pilgrims were, began to feel ashamed, and they cried out, "Let them alone now. They have been beaten. It is brave of them not to cry. Don't tease them any more." But the other boys were cruel and liked to see the white faces and the trembling lips of the poor little pilgrims. So they went on teasing them and laughing at them until their companions grew angry. And before long there was a great disturbance in the market, for the boys who were sorry for the pilgrim began to fight with those who were teasing them. The governor was obliged to send his men to stop the fighting, and he ordered Christian and Faithful to be beaten once more, because he said the quarrel had been on their account. Then they were taken back to the cage, where they lay all night in pain and distress. Wow, what intense chapters that we have there, don't we? With them going into the city Vanity Fair, they did a great job in trying to stay true to their journey and, to stay faithful to the king. There was people though that were trying to stop them, and sometimes in life that's going to happen. There's going to be people that will try to discourage us in our faith, and they may be teasing us, or there may be physical violence against Christians. Sometimes that does happen, but you know what? We need to remember to stay faithful to the Lord no matter what, because He will always care for us. He will always look out for us, and so that's a great reminder for us. So I hope you continue on in our journey, and we'll see what happens. I know it seems dark now, but there's light at the end of the tunnel for a little Christian. Thanks. Have a great day.